Hi, this is Sidney Potter with Potter Equities in Pasadena, California. Thank you for your time. I've been asked to comment about escrow, in particular on how to place a claim in escrow. This would be for a residential purchase piece of property, either be for an investment or a home in which you occupy. Well, the first question becomes, why would you put a claim in escrow? Well, the reason why you would do this typically is you're in fear of losing your deposit in connection with the piece of property that you're going to buy. And that reason, or rather the reason why you typically have a concern is because the seller of the property has a possessory right towards a claim. So in order to navigate clearly to put a claim in escrow in which to get the monies back, there's a couple of guidelines in which you'd want to follow. First and foremost, choose your escrow, if at all. Now that depends upon the customary location, the jurisdiction. Sometimes seller has the right to choose escrow, sometimes the buyer does. I recommend choosing escrow because that gives you a little bit more control of the transaction. Now let me give you a few pointers besides choosing the escrow company in which you do business with on how to keep that money from passing through to the seller in the event that there's a breach of contract. Well, first and foremost, what I would recommend as a buyer is put a small deposit. And now the old school days and where you had to put 3% of the purchase price are not what we have today in today's 2010, 2011, 2012 reality. So instead of putting $5,000 on a piece of home, I'd recommend a smaller amount. Of course, those are negotiable. That way, if things do go south and you're unable to get the claim or put a successful claim in escrow to get those monies back, at least you've limited your exposure in terms of the actual loss. 4 quick items here in terms of how not to lose your money in escrow. Make it a financing contingency in terms of the consummation and conclusion of a transaction. And that is to say that with a financing contingency on a piece of property, in the event that you don't get the mortgage that you want, the monies, that being your escrow and that being a claim in escrow, revert back to the buyer yourself. Secondly, keep this in mind as well, and I say this as a former commercial real estate broker in Los Angeles in the 90s, make it a point that, or rather you should understand, there are third parties that may have a claim to that escrow money. As a commercial broker, and we were typically the procuring cause on a transaction, if it were a $30,000 to $40,000 escrow, the brokers would have their fee connected to that because they weren't being paid a commission. So even though I'm giving you certainly some suggestions on how to put a claim in, you may not have a possessory right per the purchase agreement. Notwithstanding that, very important to get dual signatures, meaning you, the buyer, and the seller would have to sign a release of monies from the escrow agent in which that money either reverts back to the buyer or goes back, what we call the money going hard, the money goes back to the seller. If you've got dual signatures, that gives you control in terms of the directional flow of that money. So notwithstanding that, if you find yourself at a stalemate between yourself and the seller, I would recommend, especially if you want the piece of property, and I've done this several times, fortunately it hasn't happened a lot, is you have what you call a set aside. That's a set aside. An escrow agent will comply with the request that in the event, let's say you've got a haggling point who pays the HOA fee, who pays the title transfer fee, which may be a couple $1,000s, who pays a lien that came up on title. I would recommend paying that amount. Let's say, for example, you're closing the property, it's a $1,200 amount you hadn't anticipated paying. Pay that amount just to close the property, get your home, get your investment piece of property, and then on the set aside, you'll be able to negotiate that with the seller after the close of escrow. You can also have the escrow agent do what is called an interpleader. An interpleader is when the escrow agent refers the matter to the court and the court resolves the issue. Really, that's thinking big versus thinking small. And lastly, if there is no resolution and you're at a stalemate with yourself and the seller, the money eventually escheats back to the state. Escheat, Latin word, means the money goes back to a third party, rather, or to a neutral party, and therefore the state retains possession of that escrow money. And once again, you and the seller will probably have the opportunity to split that in half. So with that, I hope these were several very good tips in terms of how to resolve a claim in escrow. This is Sidney Potter with Potter Equities in Pasadena, California. Thanks for your time, and I'll see you at the finish line.